Hello folks, welcome to Ty and Sky's Health Hub. Today we're actually filming from the University of North Dakota School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Just a great view here in the background. Just wanted to give a more kind of applicable approach to where we're going to be at in terms of locations for this podcast. So expect us to be in various places throughout the series.
Yeah.
In today's episode, we actually are back with a returning guest. Welcome back, Allie.
Hi.
Yes, welcome back.
The topic being, of course, domestic violence.
And the cost of domestic violence on society.
And so this time around, just to give you guys a little bit of background, what Allie does, Allie is actually a prevention education coordinator at the Community Violence Intervention Center. So we figured that she'd be a very fitting person to talk to today about domestic violence and some of the harder parts that might affect us in our community.
Yeah, and we just want to point out as well, we want you guys to take care of yourselves as you're listening to or watching this podcast. So we have put some resources. They will be available to you guys in the links in the description for this podcast and the video version of this podcast as well. So definitely take advantage of those.
Well, thanks so much for having me on again, guys. I'm really excited. My mom's going to be super excited to be able to, listen to me talk again.
Well, you're a public health legend, so
Right,
we're really happy that you're back.
So I guess just to start us off then, would you mind defining for us and the viewers what exactly is domestic violence?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about CVIC, if that's okay, just so you kind of know where I'm coming from and the perspective that I'm coming from as far as domestic violence goes. So my role there actually is to go out into our community here in Grand Forks, where I live, and talk about domestic violence, sexual violence, all different forms of violence, and how that can affect the community, to bring awareness to it, to help prevent. So we work with youth and prevention. But then also a big part of my job is to work with professionals in the community on how they can actually recognize and respond to violence. So when I say professionals, I'm talking about law enforcement officers, medical providers, and so that's kind of where a lot of the information that I might give you today is going to be focused is from the perspective of when I'm talking to those professionals.
Perfect. So you talk to kind of a wide variety of audiences about this topic. Oh, very cool.
Just to start off, what all entails domestic abuse?
That's kind of a hard question to answer because it varies state by state. So there's different laws in each state that are directed towards assault usually. You might have simple assault, you might have aggravated assault, you might have, the actual names of the different charges vary. But the different, things that we might see somebody doing for domestic violence, which could be ranging from, that emotional or verbal abuse all the way to that physical abuse that you might typically think of, like punching, kicking, hitting, strangling, those types of behaviors. You provided
a very good example of what we find within the realm of physical abuse. Let's talk a little bit more about emotional abuse.
Emotional abuse is such an interesting topic because I think that so many people, when we talk about domestic violence, we tend to think about that physical piece, right? So it's easy for us to visualize. We can see bruises, cuts, scrapes. That's something that's easy for us to understand and see and know someone's been assaulted. But when we think about the emotional abuse, it's really hard. And actually, the way our laws are written, that's even really hard for officers to be able to even charge for. But the interesting thing is that type of abuse is something that we can see the most profound impacts on individuals. And so when I think about emotional abuse, some of the different things that come to mind would be name calling. So calling somebody stupid, ugly, worthless, no good over and over again until they really start to believe that about themselves. Isolation is another form of that emotional type abuse. It can be physical or emotional, actually. I've worked with individuals who have been physically restrained in their homes, physically isolated in that sense, but also isolation can be saying that you don't want your family members involved and breaking down that support system. We might see other forms of psychological abuse, like making somebody feel that they've gone crazy, crazy-making behavior, I like to call it, and we see that a lot with elder abuse especially. But yeah, it can really range.
And I guess a follow-up question that comes to mind based on that, do you see kind of a typical pattern in these relationships or with these abusers of like, I guess maybe we'd see it flow from maybe emotional to psychological abuse to the point where it gets to physical? Does it follow kind of a pattern or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. That's the hard thing. It can really range, and it's really dependent on that specific situation. We've got, I've had clients where there was emotional abuse going on for years, and then 13 years later, it turns to physical abuse. And that's when they recognize that they need to escape this relationship. And we also have clients where the physical abuse starts first, or they co-occur. So there's not really a good answer to that, but there are definitely red flags that we try and teach, especially younger individuals who are in relationships, so like teens who are dating. There's definitely red flags that you can be looking at.
Why does it take so long for someone to recognize those patterns? Is there any particular behavior that kind of cuts that person off from, is it sort of a manipulative behavior that occurs that kind of stops people from recognizing the patterns?
Like the survivor, from
Yes.
recognizing? There are oh my gosh, we could do a whole segment on barriers to escaping these types of relationships because, and that's really the best way to frame it, is that they're escaping. And it can, on average, it takes about 7 times for somebody in an abusive relationship to leave and leave for good. And there's so many things that go into it. So we could talk about the manipulation with the emotional abuse. The isolation is a huge piece because if you're isolated from all of your support systems, you don't know where to go. You don't have your family members to call and ask for help. You don't know about CVIC necessarily. All of those barriers are in place. Children is a big reason. So many times individuals will say, I don't want to disrupt our family. I don't want to do that to my kids. Or the abuser has threatened to take the kids or harm the kids if you do leave. So we see that as a barrier. Financial piece, that's one of the biggest ones. A really good example of that is we always talk about, a lot of times when we do trainings, we'll say, if you had to leave right now and you had an hour to go pick up your kids from school and get to a safe house or a safe shelter or a family member's place, across town or in a different state, and you only had access to the money that you have on you right now, so cash or coins, how far would you get?
Not very far
I would
at all.
not get very far at all.
Yeah, and that's almost 90% of the time that's the answer I get. I myself probably have maybe a quarter in my purse if I dump my purse out and shake it and really look.
Yeah, if that, yeah.
So, typically we in society, we use our credit cards, our debit cards, we don't have access to that cash. And victims and survivors usually don't have that access to those financial resources. So
yeah, I suppose those methods that are easy to control for the abuser, like cards, things that can be tabs can be kept on.
And now we have even more invasive technology that
Right.
GPS tracking, and I've read plenty of stories where someone's either keeping track of their spouse or making sure
Other children. Yeah.
crazy how technology has even changed the way stalking happens, and it's pretty intense. But some other barriers too, outside of financial, one big one that I should mention is just the lethality of the situation. The lethality increases so much when that person makes the decision to leave. A lot of times when you hear things on the news or TV where there's been a homicide or a homicide-suicide connected to domestic violence, you'll hear those terms, estranged, recently separated, divorce, because that's the most lethal time frame. And now we know that ultimately people are going to be safer if they do get out of that relationship, but in the meantime, when they're making that decision, that's the most dangerous time.
So CVIC offers services to these survivors, and you guys are providing services during this most lethal time. Could we have you just elaborate a little bit on what's done specifically during this time period to keep these survivors safe?
Yeah, that's, an interesting question. It's very different for each situation, depending on the dynamics that exist, depending on the lethality. One thing that we do in this community in Grand Forks, which is amazing, is we've recently, within the last year and a half, implemented what's called the Lethality Assessment Protocol, and or the LAP, as we like to call it. Like I said last time, we're big on acronyms. But it's something that it's a national evidence-based program that came out of Maryland, and the program trains law enforcement officers. They have a certain list of questions that are evidence-based that they ask individuals when they go to a 911 call for domestic violence to assess the lethality of that situation. And the goal of that is to identify individuals who are in the most high danger. Once they identify those individuals, they connect them to an advocate right away via phone. So what used to happen is by law, officers are required to give out a CBIC card and say, here's a resource, you should call them tomorrow. But what happens is once the chaos kind of dies down, things get back in place, people don't tend to reach out. So it's just an easier way to connect them to an advocate. And then that advocate will do safety planning with that person right then and there. And then hopefully the next day they can go in and have a longer, lengthy safety plan. So one of the things they do is safety planning. And we safety plan for individuals for if they think they're going to stay in that relationship and for getting out. And so because we recognize that it might not be the right time and that individual knows their safety better than we do.
Do you find it hard to work with those survivors on safety plans when you know you're sending them kind of back into this relationship?
Oh, definitely. It's one of those things that is emotionally tolling because you just never know. But I think what really keeps our advocates at CBIC going is just the hope and that, that they're giving them the best tools they can in the situation, whatever that might be, and that when that person's ready, they'll be able to escape. If we try and force somebody out, can cause huge safety concerns, especially because they know where that person's at. And a lot of times we'll hear individuals say, like, it's safer for me to stay right now because I'd rather know when the violence is going to happen and, know when this person's coming home from work than to leave. And a lot of times they don't know where they are or if they're following them or if they're going to find them. And that can be really scary too, so.
You spoke before about the barriers to getting help. For those that are abused, do you see that the barrier of actually approaching for help is actually in itself just a very large mental barrier for someone? Kind of, if they never have to ask for help, is it just them denying that there's a problem, or is it more of an issue of that if they accept help, then they finally have to accept that it is a problem, that it is a reality for them?
We find it's more that safety piece is probably really just the biggest part there. To reaching out. And then also, like in our society, there is shame and stigma surrounding being a victim, right? And we see that with sexual assault. We see how underreported that is because it's, we don't want to label ourselves as a victim because how are victims treated in our society? Not very well. And so that's one of those cultural and societal barriers that we kind of have to overcome. But to speak to the emotional piece there, if you were being told that you're stupid, worthless, ugly, no good over and over again, and that, you're lucky, no one else would love you, you're lucky that I support you and all this stuff, you start to believe that. And so that is a barrier because if you think that and that's your normal right now, you don't know that there's something better out there or that you don't deserve this.
Is it quite a long process to bring somebody out of that mental structure that I'm worthless, I mess everything up, I'm stupid? Do you find that that's a difficult process to kind of reprogram somebody to think more positively about themselves coming out of this?
Yeah, I think it definitely can be. And I can't speak to that specifically. I'm not a therapist, so I don't do that actual work, that healing piece. And so, I know that our therapists are trained in one of the therapies that they use is EMDR. The easiest way for me to describe it actually is if you think about digesting your food, like how your stomach digests your food. EMDR helps your brain digest traumatic memories that you've attached to different associations so that you can kind of move on past that and not associate the way you feel about yourself with those memories because it works to process those. But again, I'm not a therapist, so.
Oh, yeah. And I guess just acronym again. What does EMDR stand for?
Please don't make
Sorry.
me say it. Eye movement desensitization, something like that. Rapid eye movement desensitization. Just look it up. If you Google EMDR, I always
Yeah, that's
butcher.
interesting.
I just call it EMDR.
No, sorry, we put you on the spot.
So I pray when I go out to trainings that people don't ask me to say to spell it out or
We
say
hit the
it.
one question, yeah.
So if we have people in our community suffering from domestic abuse, if say I'm a member of the community that's not suffering from this, but I may have friends or family that may be suffering from this, what are some of the signs that I can look at to try to either notice that, hey, this person needs help, or that I might need to get in contact with someone to try to, or I might need to talk to them personally? Is there any sort of way to kind of set that up?
That's a great question. So, one of the best ways to kind of go into this is for me to actually give you the definition of domestic violence. So for domestic violence, we consider that to be a pattern of abusive and coercive behaviors where one person in a relationship feels the need or sense of entitlement for all of the power and control in that relationship. So in a healthy relationship, we've got people who are on equal playing fields with the power and in that relationship, and they might fight, they might argue, they might not agree on everything, but they're able to compromise and to not use violence to solve those issues. Whereas in an unhealthy or domestic violence situation, one person holds all of the power and control and then exerts different tactics to gain or maintain that power and control. So the reason I give you that is because power and control in a relationship is one of the best ways to identify if this is happening with someone. So that isolation piece that we talked about, if you're recognizing that, if somebody is not letting them hang out with you, or they have to spend all of their time with their significant other, or they've randomly cut off family members, and it's not because of like a safety or, they're not good for you kind of concern.
Yeah.
So those types of things are big red flags. If you start noticing that there's controlling behavior, so constantly texting, where are you? What are you doing? Why are you talking to that person? What are you saying? When are you going to be home? And I have to say that's such a hard one, especially for teenagers, because when you get a lot of text messages, it can sometimes feel like infatuation and like, this person loves me, they really care about me, they're always wanting to know where I'm at. But it's, hard to identify that line where it crosses over to being controlling. But
Yeah, no, that definitely seems like that would be really tough because, like you pointed out, I can imagine if it gets really hard to define where infatuation ends and where control starts.
Yeah.
So whether or not
absolutely.
it's a product of that person's feelings for you or something inherent in this person, like it's a power play for them,
Right.
something.
And do you think that mindset of trying to, I guess, if you're involved in a relationship, you might say, oh, this person had an emotional outburst. It's only going to happen one time.
Make
It's
excuses.
never going to happen. Like they cover for their partner. But generally, a lot of people do get emotional at times, and sometimes it is just an outburst. But how do you really recognize early on then, I guess, if that's kind of a concern? Are you just looking for consistency of the same behaviors then?
Yeah, that pattern like you're talking about, that's definitely one of the ways to differentiate. If this is something that we slowly kind of see becoming a pattern with how they deal with their emotions and how they deal with conflict, then that's definitely a red flag. If somebody's respectful in their speech and respectful in the way that they handle conflict, then you're not necessarily going to see those power and control dynamics even when they have outbursts. I mean, I've definitely said things to my husband that I, regret or wish I haven't said.
Yeah.
We've had those moments, but it's not me trying to control the way that he thinks or views himself or the actions that he's doing. I'm not, trying to impact him in that harmful way. It's a hard one. It's hard. That's why a lot of people don't recognize the signs, and it's hard right away. And it's hard to leave then because, they love this person. They've got family with this person. They have all the good times. I've worked with several individuals who have said, I don't want the relationship to end. I just want the violence to end. I want to go back to those good times.
Is there any possibility? Have you ever seen any change where that's actually happened in kind of your work at CVIC, where it's gone from, I guess, these good times that people were talking about to the abusive situation, and then somehow been able to revert back through therapy provided to the abuser and the abused? Or, have you ever seen that actually happen?
It's very rare, and that typically what needs to happen is that relationship does need to end if there's violence going on. And then that person who's choosing to use the abusive behaviors needs to go through a program like New Choices or something like that, an offender treatment program, not anger management. So a lot of times people have this misconception that offender treatment is synonymous, I think that's the right word,
Yes.
with offender.
That is the word of the day.
That is the word.
With anger management, and it's not the same thing at all. It's not about just controlling your anger, angry outbursts. It's really looking into those dynamics of that power and control. So they really have to do an assessment and be willing to make those changes, and it's hard. Sometimes it takes them a couple of times to go through the program. It doesn't happen the first time. But if they're willing to do that, and they do that, and the survivor, on the other hand, heals, and there's been enough time, it could, you could have a healthy relationship and come out of that. But usually what tends to happen is we have that relationship end.
Okay. And yeah, you made a really good point in that I just wanted to draw further attention to that I had never thought of that way in comparing anger management to the classes that these abusers go through in order to successfully have a relationship again. There's that power and control piece that fits into the abusive relationship. It's not just an anger thing. And I've never I can definitely see how people could historically get confused about that piece because you think it's just something I just need to, from the abuser's perspective, I just need to not get as mad.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's a really good point.
And
really important.
We see a lot of times people will talk about this as, oh, it was a one-time thing, or I was just out of control. But one of the reasons we know that domestic violence is a choice and it's not just that person being out of control is because typically they're in control of the actions that they're doing. So if someone's out of control, we might see them having an angry outburst on the subway, in the store, with the watermelons, or with their boss when they're having stress, that kind of thing. We have an example of a client who had mentioned like, oh, my abuser was really out of control. And well, I should probably give the backstory to the story. Sorry. So this individual was trying to leave the relationship. She was taking steps, working with her advocate on things that she could do. One of the things she was going to get, she had a job interview. She was going to get a job so that she could start making some of that money to have that financial piece. And she needed new interview clothes. And so when they were asking about what happened to your clothes, she was like, he just really lost it. He was totally out of control. He took scissors to my closet and he was just cutting all of the clothes in my closet. And that's why she didn't have clothes. So then, she was asked, well, where did he stop cutting the clothes? Where do you think he stopped cutting?
Did he stop?
Did he stop at all?
Yeah, so he stopped at his clothes. So if he was really out of control, he would have just been cutting all the clothes in the closet. But this was definitely a control tactic because he was cutting her clothes.
No, that's a really interesting piece, and I think a really kind of a very good answer to the question you asked earlier, Skylar, about what are the signs.
Yeah.
Because this is a great way to define, like you mentioned, what's in control behavior and what's out of control behavior.
And I definitely think it speaks a lot to the very huge distinction between anger and what's necessarily malicious and what's planned, what's I guess just kind of set out to as with regards to a power dynamic of it's just more about control over more than anger. It's not necessarily that you're angry with your spouse or with your partner, but that you have this desire for control.
If you Google the power and control wheel, that is a really great way to understand the different tactics that an abuser might use. And so it's got power and control in the center of the wheel. On the outside of the wheel, you'll see physical and sexual violence. And then it's broken into like pie slices of emotional abuse, name calling, isolation, threats, threatening behavior, all those different tactics that somebody might use. So that's a really great resource, especially if you know someone who might be experiencing violence. You can kind of show them this wheel and say, are there any of these things that you see going on in your relationship? And some of the wheels give specific examples of each tactic. And it's a really amazing tool to kind of help somebody recognize like, oh, wow, like this is going on. This isn't okay, And then on the flip side, we have what we call the equality wheel. And that shows healthy behaviors that we want to have in a relationship.
So kind of moving along here, we've talked about kind of patterns, signs that we can look at to identify if somebody in our vicinity is being affected by domestic abuse or intimate partner violence. Once we suspect that that's happening, like say I have somebody that I suspect is a victim, or even if I have somebody, and these answers might be different, so maybe I'll ask them in turn. Let's start out by asking if I have somebody in my life that I suspect is a victim of intimate partner violence, what should I do? What are some things I can do to help that person out?
First and foremost, letting them know that you believe them. So if they're coming to you saying like this abuse is happening, one of the best things you can do is letting them know that you do believe them, because a lot of times one of the control tactics that they're hearing is that no one's going to believe you, no one's going to listen to you. Look at me, I'm super well known in this community, whatever it might be. They have barriers. So just letting them know that you do believe them and that you're there for them. And then I would suggest asking them if you can connect them with resources. So giving them resources like the Community Violence Intervention Center.
Do you have to take particular care with the way you provide resources? Because I'm kind of thinking if you give resources in a way that the abuser would come across them, would that maybe make the situation worse?
It definitely can. And so one of the things that we often train doctors and nurses who are doing universal screening for domestic violence, never force someone to take a resource card or a brochure or whatever it might be, because again, we talked about earlier that they know their safety more than we do, right? So they can assess that situation a little bit better. They know that there might be a reason I can't take this card, because if they find it, that's going to be an excuse or a reason why there might be violence. And so yeah, absolutely letting it be in the control in the hands, never force something on somebody. So
if we suspect somebody that we know is an abuser, Is there anything that I could do or anybody could do to, I guess, help prevent further abuse from that side of the coin?
If you're aware of abuse happening, I definitely would say report it. You can report anonymously because really we want to connect those people to the resources to get the help, whether that be law enforcement officers, child protective services, whatever it might be. Maybe if it's somebody that you're friends with, having a conversation and calling them out on it, letting them know that it's not okay and you don't think it's okay, pointing out resources like New Choices that they could maybe enter if they're willing to. And then if you're really suspecting that there's a survivor or victim in that relationship, trying to connect that person to resources, I would say.
Where can we report that?
So you can call 911 if you think if the situation warrants it. It's scary because you don't know if you're going to make it worse or what's going to happen, but ultimately that's one of the best things that you can do. As far as reports go, I mentioned child protective services. If you know of children living in the home, then you can report to CPS.
Do you think there's any sort of stigma attached to reporting these type of issues themselves? Like, I know that for a good deal amount of people, some people would rather say it's not my problem, it's not my issue. Some people would prefer to look the other way. So they'll say, I don't want to get involved with this. I don't want to have any sort of physical threats to me because it's not my place. Do you think there's anything in society that kind of contributes to that type of mentality among people that aren't willing to help others?
There's been in society this view of it's a family matter, or this person made their bed, now they have to lie in it. You kind of hear those different terms, especially maybe in older generations where it was very common for this to be between a family. A lot of that stems from just the way our culture has been set up. So if you think back, it made sense, for people to think that way. If like a wife or a woman was somebody's property, well, you're not going to get involved with how they handle their property, right? And that was, real in society for a very long time. And so those kind of have lingered, but I will say we've gotten so much better in the last 20 years.
And I've heard that it's really frequent that women are largely the victims of abuse. Do you find that to be the case, or is there more of a dispersal of different kinds of people approaching the center at all, or is it just primarily majority women at this point?
That's a great question. Statistically speaking, women are disproportionately affected by domestic violence and sexual violence. But with that being said, do you have a group that's similar for female offenders? It's a different program because there's different dynamics we typically see of individuals who identify as female who use violence against their partners. We tend to see different dynamics there. And so it's a different group.
Can we talk a little bit about the differences that you see in dynamics?
Sure, a little bit.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So one of the things with women who use violence in their relationships, we see a higher proportion of individuals using like retaliation violence is something that we would call it. And so they're still using violence. It's still an assault, so they might be arrested, but it's typically tends to be in response to violence that they've been experiencing. So we have to look at, was there self-defense going on? Because does that person have to wait to be, violated first before they defend themselves? All those different dynamics. And not always, because there are women who are domestic violence abusers, have that power and control, but it's not typically what we see. Typically it's they're retaliating with violence because they're like, I've had it. I'm taking the power back in this relationship.
If in that situation where, in this case, there's abuse going both ways, is this something fitting for couples counseling, or does this mark something that's the end of like a relationship needs to be
Great
done,
question.
right?
I'm so happy you brought that up because that's another misconception, like the anger management we talked about. Couples counseling should never, ever be used as a fix for if there's power and control dynamics or if there's domestic violence going on. That counselor might not know that there's domestic violence going on. If they get court ordered to couples counseling or something like that, they might not know the full picture of what's happening, and that whoever is, using that power and control can instantly control that victim and use that as an excuse, saying, well, look, your counselor said you need to do this. Your counselor agrees with me. The counselor is saying it's your fault if you just would compromise or do these different things. And that's not on the counselor. They maybe just don't know because that's what they're doing with couples counseling.
So you can see those actually kind of making things worse.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can definitely increase the lethality of those situations.
What can we do to actually help our local organizations like CVIC, is there any sort of way that we can volunteer? Is there any way that we can help donate?
Good question.
Anything that you're passionate about or your different resources that you have available, you can, donate those or donate your time. But you can always just call and ask, hey, are there any volunteer opportunities? Is there anything I can help out with? Sometimes it's like the little things like, paperwork, like helping stuff envelopes for, sending letters out, things like that can be a huge help too. Oh, and donating like resources. Didn't even think about our shelter. We're always in need of feminine hygiene products, especially because, a lot of times people don't think that's something that somebody might need donated. Also like shampoos, toothpaste, new toys for kids, just, things that somebody who's leaving everything behind and fleeing this relationship might need to start a new life.
So it seems like there are multiple ways that people can get involved in their communities, whether it be providing financial resources, providing resources otherwise, like taking a trip to Walmart or Target and dropping that stuff off at the shelter, to actually getting involved themselves in being the person on the end of the phone. What steps can we all take, I guess, as a society to, or even just in our communities, to end this era of violence?
First of all, awareness. Awareness is big. I talked to, I think our stats last year were like 11,000 individuals every year in our community, and I still get new groups who have no idea that these problems exist or that a place like CVIC exists. And so awareness, talking to your friends, family members, letting them know that these things do happen and that, it's, talking about those victim blaming statements we might hear and kind of debunking those statements or myths. And then prevention, like, one of the ways that we teach prevention is we teach young kids at an early age how to deal with conflict. Talking to your sons and daughters when they're young and, trying to create this culture where we treat individuals as humans, because one of the easiest ways to commit violence against somebody is once you take away that humanity from them. So if you see somebody less than, it's easier to commit violent acts against them.
So it seems like there's this, in order for us to overcome this, it's more than just a person who is abusing, person who is being abused, immediate family members, even more than an organization like CVIC could accomplish by itself. It seems like kind of what you're telling us is that this involves kind of a society-wide change in the way violence in general is talked about, in the way masculinity is discussed, power and control in relationships, and kind of all these things that you've touched on.
And just to say as a thank you for coming up, I did bring you something.
Something
very special.
You guys may not know this, but it's actually Allie's birthday tomorrow, and she decided to come on the show today. Pre her birthday outing, so we had to get her a little bit of a birthday gift.
So for those of you that watched the first episode, you might remember that Allie's a big fan of muffins.
Yes.
And muffins are not complete without spoons.
It's the only way to eat them, people. Seriously, do it. It will change your life. I'm not kidding. Life-changing. We want to talk about changing society. Try a muffin with a spoon, because you get all the good stuff. So, yeah.
Well, yes. Well, happy birthday. Thank you for coming on to our show again and discussing this very sensitive topic. We really appreciate having somebody who is so knowledgeable on the subject matter.
Yes, and definitely, and for you viewers, we'll definitely have all of the resources posted down at the bottom in our description. So if you happen to have any sort of questions or anything, please feel free to comment. Just we can always forward to Allie later and get them answered.
Absolutely.
So all resources will be down at the bottom for your consultation. But once again, thank you so much, Allie, for doing this with us. We definitely appreciate all your time, and hopefully you enjoy those muffins.
Spoon muffins.